close the door, or are they fine open? Welcome to the Education Committee public hearing. My name is Lynn Walls from Legislative District 15. I serve as the chair of the committee. The committee will take up the items in the order on the posted agenda. I do have my glasses on. Today's hearing is for invited testimony only. To better facilitate today's proceeding, I ask that you abide by the following procedures. Please turn off or silence your cell phones or other electronic devices. Move to the chairs at the front of the room when you are ready to testify. If you have written materials that you would like distributed to the committee, please hand them to the page to distribute. We need 10 copies for all committee members and staff. If you need additional copies, please ask the page to make copies for you now. When you begin to testify, state and spell your name for the record. Please speak directly into the microphone so our transcribers are able to hear your testimony clearly. Finally, please be concise. Testimony will be limited to 5 minutes. We will be using the light system. Green equals 5 minutes remaining, yellow 1 minute remaining, and you'll wrap up your comments when you see the red light. The committee members with us today will introduce themselves beginning at my far right. Just in time.
I'm Senator Dave Merman from District 38. Was in South Central Nebraska, now it's shifted a little more toward right along the Nebraska-Kansas southern border.
Good afternoon. I'm Lou Ann Lanahan. I represent Elkhorn and Waterloo, but now Senator Walls has Valley.
Good afternoon. I'm Senator Jen Day. I represent Legislative District 49, which is now North Central Sarpy County.
Good afternoon, Rita Sanders, District 45, which is the eastern part of Sarpy County, the Bellevue-Offutt community.
I'd like to introduce the committee staff. To my immediate right is research analyst Nicole Barrett, and to the right end of the table is committee clerk Noah Boger. And our pages today are Jenna. Wave, Jenna. Please remember that senators may come and go during our hearing as they have bills to introduce in other committees. I'd also like to remind our committee members to speak directly into the microphones and limit side conversations and making noise on personal devices. We are an electronics equipped committee, and information is provided electronically as well as in paper form. Therefore, you may see committee members referencing information on their electronic devices. Please be assured that your presence here today and your testimony are important to us and crucial to our state government. And with that, we will open with LR 180, introduced by Senator Walls. It's an interim study to examine the identification of at-risk and economically disadvantaged students as a qualification factor for state-funded education-related programs. So I'm just going to do my opening here, if that's all right. Good afternoon, colleagues. This interim study was introduced to help us as a committee better understand the use of free and reduced price lunch as a measure of poverty in our education statutes. There are numerous occasions in statute where we use free and or reduced lunch as the eligibility standard for other programs. For example, free use of musical instruments, waiver of activity fees, and eligibility for Access College Early Scholarship. Despite the U.S. Department of Education for decades advising against using free and reduced price meals as a measure of poverty for eligibility for such programs, it has been repeatedly enacted in Nebraska education statute, and we are not alone in that. States across the country are facing the same challenge that Nebraska is. That challenge, the U.S. Department of Education has developed the Community Eligibility Program, also known as CEP. CEP allows schools with a minimum 40% free and reduced lunch population to offer free meals to all students. While this is a very positive program in terms of feeding our students, it makes it more difficult to target finite resources to the kids most in need for other programs. Today, I've invited a few people to speak with the committee to offer their perspective on the problem or other possible solutions on how we might consider eligibility for these types of programs in the future. And with that, do I take questions? It's weird being both. I'll try to answer any questions that you have, committee members. Okay, then we will open with our first testifier, Mike Baumgarter from CCPE.
Good afternoon, Chairwoman Walls, members of the Education Committee. My name is Mike Baumgartner, MikeBaumgartner. I'm the Executive Director of the Coordinating Commission for Post-Secondary Education, and I'm here today to speak about how at-risk and economically disadvantaged students are identified for eligibility in our 3 need-based financial aid programs with a particular focus on the Access College Early Scholarship Program. I'll address the Community College Gap Assistance Program and Nebraska Opportunity Grant programs first. Briefly, both serve adults, that is, post-high school students in post-secondary settings. The Community College Gap Assistance Program pays for non-credit programs and short-term for-credit non-Pell eligible programs for students who have a family income at or above 250% of federal poverty guidelines. Applicants must provide recent pay stubs as proof of income and Form 1040s as proof of family size. The Nebraska Opportunity Grant Program provides aid to Nebraska undergraduates with a demonstrated financial needs and uses a free application for federal student aid to determine eligibility, otherwise known as Fafsa. Demonstrated need means that a student has an expected family contribution equal to or less than 110% of the maximum expected family contribution to qualify for federal Pell Grants in an award year. For 21-22, the maximum EFC for Pell eligibility is 5,846, so the NOG maximum is 6,431. Using FAFSA makes perfect sense for NOG because it is required to access all federal Title IV financial aid programs, most prominently Pell Grant and direct student loan programs, and much student aid from the institutions. A couple of points I want to make about the FAFSA. First, many students or potential students who need financial aid the most, particularly at high schools with large populations of low-income students, don't fill out the FAFSA, and the problem is worsened because of the pandemic. As of Monday, only half of 2020-21 high school seniors in Nebraska had completed the FAFSA. Only one OPS high school had exceeded 33% of FAFSA completion. Second, changes made to the 2021 Fafsa Simplification Act will reduce information needed to complete the FAFSA substantially, starting in 23-24, and allow students whose families don't file taxes and students eligible for means-tested benefits, SSI, SNAP, TANF, WIC, Medicaid, and housing assistance to skip all asset questions. That should increase the number of students who complete the FAFSA. Importantly for the NOG program, the U.S. Department of Education's calculation of EFC will be replaced by Calculated Student Aid Index. We will need a statutory change for NOG eligibility in 2023-24 to replace EFC with the Student Aid Index, but we're awaiting additional information from the federal government before we can bring a proposed change. That will probably be in the 2023 legislative session, but 2022 is also a possibility. Our third program is the Access College Early Scholarship, which pays college tuition and fees for low-income high school students enrolled in dual credit or early enrollment courses. This scholarship program served 2,433 students, taking 4,518 courses last year. High school students may apply for funding under this program by completing the ACE student application online, which is reviewed by the Coordinating Commission for award consideration. For the past several years, we have limited students to 2 courses per year to serve more students, but increases in funding this year and next allow us to go up to 3. To qualify for the scholarship, the student or student's family must be approved to participate in or receive free or reduced lunches, supplemental Social Security income, TANF, SNAP, WIC, have experienced extreme hardship that affects family income, in which case we request additional information, or be participating in a designated career education program as established by the Nebraska Department of Education. Free and reduced lunch eligibility is by far the most common way of qualifying. In fact, between 97 and 98% of students qualify that way annually. This exposes the program to potential problems if the community eligibility provision is widely adopted by the eligible school districts, or if state and federal law changes to make all students eligible for free lunches under the U.S. Department of Ed nutrition programs without means testing. With a limited amount of funding for the ACE program, we simply must direct scholarships to students who need them most. We discussed this issue with you in the context of LB 950 in 2020 and came to a partial solution that you included this year in LB 528, allowing us to request that the Commissioner of Education verify student eligibility for free and reduced lunches. That can work when a small number of high schools, such as those currently participating in CEP, when it's small, But what if the larger districts adopt CEP and we're suddenly dealing with tens of thousands of additional students? Or what if the state and federal program changes mean NDE no longer collects information on free and reduced lunch students? At that point, I think we'd be facing several options. First, we could strike free and reduced lunch eligibility from the ACE statute and rely on eligibility for the other named federal programs, perhaps adding Medicaid as other programs might. We don't know how many students might be eligible as a result of this, but it would be significantly less than free and reduced lunch because the poverty guidelines for those programs are much more restrictive than free and reduced lunch programs. Second, we could undertake that option and develop eligibility criteria that mirrored free and reduced lunch eligibility with a new application added to our online ACE application system. That would require us to collect and verify family income in a way we currently do only for hardship cases, which would be overwhelming if we weren't able to automate the process through data sharing agreements with other families. We'd have to go back to something like I mentioned we do with the Community College Gap Assistance Program, which is pay stubs and 1040s. We do not want that information. Or we would have to get information perhaps directly from the Nebraska Department of Revenue. Not excited about that prospect either. Third, we could undertake the first option, knocking out free and reduced lunches, and add a qualification of Fafsa to replace free and reduced lunch eligibility. In other words, a student that didn't qualify under the remaining federal means tests could complete the Fafsa to qualify for ACE. I know that using Fafsa to qualify for ACE is an unpopular idea with schools, but the Fafsa simplification I mentioned earlier would make the process easier and it would familiarize the students with that process and thereby increase college going. Fourth, the state could come up with an entirely new measure coming out of this study or others that we could add to the ACE statute and integrate into our system. Or finally, we could make dual credit and early enrollment free for all students in the state, building on the additional money that the Appropriations Committee has put into the community colleges over the past several years and allocating current ACE funding to that appropriation. So right now, we have $2 million going into dual credit. Next year, the Appropriations Committee, the legislature, and the governor put in $3 million for the community colleges for tuition for dual credit. Add the $1.5 million from ACE, we would probably have to double that amount in total, but we could get to free community college that way and dispense with this issue of free and reduced lunch eligibility altogether. Be happy to answer or attempt to answer any questions you have.
Thank you. Questions from the committee? Senator Linehan?
Thank you, Chairwoman Wallace. I have a lot of questions here. This is really helpful information. So your last line here, that would put us on par with many states that offer dual and early enrollment opportunities at no cost to high school students. Do you know how other states pay for that? Do you have a study that you can share with us, these states and how they do it?
Yes, I can get that to you.
Okay.
Iowa does it through school districts. Minnesota does it through a combination. Colorado does it with state funding. Ohio and Indiana do it with state funding. Idaho state funding. So some of it is coming from what's allocated to the school districts or what they raise, and some of it's coming directly from the state. But I will get the most.
But all of those
information
states that you just mentioned provide it for free,
yes, they do.
regardless of the student's income, or?
Yes, regardless of the student's income.
Well, that sounds like a plan. Okay, thank you very much.
Other questions? Senator Merman?
Yeah, just to clarify, other states do that for free for all students, not
Yes.
just for targeted
That's right.
occupations.
Yeah, I mean, there are others that do fewer students, but there are quite a few states that have free dual credit for all high school students in the state.
To the state colleges and
Usually
just
at
community
the community college level,
Yeah.
but Indiana, they will pay a set amount if you don't take it at the community college. So
okay, so these other states do it on the community college
no,
level.
usually, not exclusively, but usually.
Okay.
Yeah, I'll make sure that we have the most current information from all the states. Education Commission for the states does a lot of work on this, and I'll get that from them.
Thank you.
Senator Linehan?
I'm sorry, one more question. So you would agree, I think it was Senator Vargas who had a bill last year to make the FAFSA part of graduating requirement. Kind of sound like maybe you would agree with that would be a good idea.
We did testify on behalf of that 2 years ago. That is gaining currency. It is in 4 states. there's 5 states right now: Alabama, Louisiana, Illinois, Texas, Indiana is partway there. So it's hard to see what the results have been because of the pandemic, just messed everything up. There are ways to do that. You could have it as Senator Vargas's bill did, where students could opt out. Indiana was looking for grants to schools to address the issues that they had with counselors' time, trying to make it less onerous. I do find it very problematic and disturbing that at our poorest schools, sometimes a quarter or a third of the students will fill out the FAFSA, which means that they are unlikely to go on. And we know the college going rates of students buy free and reduced lunch. Speaking of an income indicator that is problematic. But we know that, and we know that it's much less than the students who are not on free and reduced lunch. So we might want to see how that rolls out more in other states first, but
But you support it. so
I
that's
do
great.
support it.
Okay, thank you very much.
Any other questions? I have a question, and maybe I missed it, but it said that the FAFSA has been simplified and they skip all asset questions. Is that,
For many students, for students who are in means-tested federal benefit programs, or who do not file taxes at all, are liable to be in the same situation, or for students with AGI below 225% of poverty in a single-parent household. Got the information to be happy to provide to you on, but yes, there will be a lot of students who don't have to provide asset questions. And part of the idea behind Fafsa Simplification was that if I am a beneficiary of a means-tested program, I already know that I have a 0 EFC. So completing the Fafsa is going to be pretty easy. And I know if I have a 0 EFC, this is what I can expect from the Pell Grant. It was an idea to help them plan out education in late in their high school years before they got to the senior year and really started worrying about how they're going to pay for college.
so it does still allow them to target the kids who are in most need?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, it targets that even more. So the ones that you just expect won't have much in the way of assets given income, they can skip those questions because that's where people really get hung up and go, there's 110 questions and I have no idea. So it's,
Okay, I just wanted to make sure. All right, any other questions? I don't see any. Thank you so much for coming today. Our next testifier is Bryce Wilson from NDE.
Good afternoon, Bryce Wilson, the Administrator of Financial and Administrative Services for the Department of Education. I'd say this is a very well-timed hearing. One of the issues we possibly may have coming up this next year with TIOSA, the funding formula, is free lunch counts. With the pandemic this last couple of years, we've had free lunches for all students, right? So I requested the data. We don't quite have it ready yet, so I don't know exactly what the free lunch counts are going to be. Those lag behind 2 years that we use in TIOSA. And so we may have right now, coming up for this next calculation of TIOSA, a free lunch issue as far as counts. Students may not have completed those applications. So school districts' free lunch counts may be significantly off of what normally we would see for those school districts. So we might have funding issues going on there for the poverty allowance, which uses the free lunch counts. So it is one very interesting piece to this, I think, that may play into some of this as well, as we've already been kind of exploring and looking and kind of going out and seeing what are other states doing just because of this issue. Currently, the poverty allowance uses both the free lunch counts that we get through the nutrition program and also looks at low-income numbers that we get from the Department of Revenue. We compare those two different counts. The numbers that come from the low-income numbers that come from the Department of Revenue are adjusted because those would be total amounts in a district. Obviously, not all kids go to a district school there, so we average it with the census count of kids in there to adjust it up or down accordingly, so it's more accurate of how many low-income kids are actually in the district attending there. So we have districts, I don't know exactly what that breakout is of how often we use free lunch versus that low income number, but we definitely use the free lunch significantly more than the low income count. So usually the free lunch counts are higher when we compare those for the poverty allowance, and that's what the poverty allowance has us do, is take the greater of those two numbers. One of the things too that's also interesting in how we do the school finance piece and uses the free lunch counts is that we're currently already using a different method, because you started to hear the term, you threw out the term CEP. Well, when we have districts that have elected, or school buildings that have elected to use CEP for their building, we no longer have free lunch counts for those buildings. And so we've used, essentially there's what we call direct certification, where we have programs like SNAP, TANF, FDPIR, Federal Distribution Program on Indian Reservations, Medicaid, homeless, foster care, and migrant programs collect those low income or those students. And then we come up with these students that are directly certified as being low income. What we've used those numbers for is to come up with a rate for that CEP. Ultimately, when CEP first became a thing in our state, we looked at those counts and did calculations out for every school building and district across the state to see what would put them back in the same kind of place. When you have direct cert, you're not going to have as high a number as you will when you're taking free lunch counts. It's going to be a little bit less. There's some kids that kind of fall through the cracks as far as those other programs, but their parents, they may fill out the free lunch application and qualify. And so to do that and look across the state and try and keep schools that were electing CEP whole without hurting them by going to that program, we did calculations at the department to determine what needed to happen there to put them whole. And at that time, which was 8 years ago, I think, we added a 1.1 multiplier in the state statutes to try and put school districts back to the whole. We just recently ran those numbers again for OPS, and it seems like that multiplier is still working very well. It came out very close to where their current, if they went to a district-wide CEP, they would come out very, very close to where the calculated amount not being CEP is. So things like that we've already taken care of. And so there could be shifts to things like direct certification. Some states are using just direct cert. There's across the nation, we have states using everything from free lunch. That's still the predominantly used one, but they're starting to mix and match. Some use combinations of both. There's 4 or 5 states that went to just direct cert and kind of are using a multiplier to get back to something similar to those free lunch counts. The other piece financially that this plays into is the Title I allocations. Title I uses those free lunch counts to determine how those funds are distributed out to schools and within districts, how that's going to specific schools. Districts over 20,000, switching from districts over 20,000 don't use free lunch counts to determine their allocations. Districts under 20,000, it is part of the calculation used to determine those Title I allocations. But that free lunch count, even in those districts above 20,000, does determine where those funds must be used at in the district. So for your large districts like an OPS, that will determine how, if you elect CEP or non-CEP, where those funds should flow within the district. So there's a lot of implications financially, and I just see the red light. So I don't know if there's questions. I can go a million different directions on this topic, but I'd be glad to answer any questions you guys have.
All right, questions from the committee? I have a question. Is the department gathering that information and disseminate it out to school districts regarding TANF, Medicaid? Or is it the school districts that are doing that?
HHS actually gathers the direct certification information and shares it with our nutrition team. So it actually comes through the Department of Health and Human Services.
Okay, all right, thank you. Senator Linehan?
So when you said Medicaid, would that be if the children are under CHIP, they're covered by CHIP? Is that the same difference?
I don't know what the qualifications are to fit in the Medicaid program for the direct cert. I'm not sure on that.
It's It's 250% of poverty, isn't it, on CHIP? I think it's higher than free and reduced lunch. I'm not, free and reduced lunch is 180%, right?
I couldn't tell you that
No.
either.
Okay, we can figure that out.
But we do, for TOS purposes, we only use free lunch. We don't use reduced. It's just
Oh.
free lunch students for TOS
Okay.
purposes.
Okay. But as you said before, there's not that much difference, right, between free and reduced, numbers wise?
I don't know off the top of my head about
Okay.
how many fall into the reduced category.
Okay, that's fine. Thank you very much.
Any other questions? Thank you.
Yeah, no
Okay.
problem.
All right, our next testifier is Danielle Conrad from ACLU. There's a page available.
Okay. Hi, good afternoon. Happy Friday. Hi, my name is Danielle Conrad. It's Danielle Conrad, Conrad. I'm here today on behalf of the ACLU of Nebraska, and clearly it is Friday. I almost forgot how to spell my name today. So, and that's particularly embarrassing in front of the Education Committee of all places. So, anyway, my dear friend and colleague Spike Eichel would have been here otherwise, but as soon as you finished your redistricting work, he made a point to get out to hunting season. So I'm sure that many of you are eager to return to some other activities as well. And we want to commend you for staying and conducting this important work and this important hearing after just working through a very arduous special session. So I passed out a lot of information to you for your files. There's a lot of really thoughtful, brilliant, talented testifiers here today to provide their specifics and expertise. And we just kind of wanted to keep it really top lines and, really ground the importance of this study in terms of educational equity and in terms of racial justice and in terms of ensuring equal access for all students to the programs and services they need so that they can be their best selves and achieve at their highest levels, which is critical for their success and our shared prosperity. So that being said, think about some of these really big concepts. When you think about educational equity, you can think about the guarantees of Brown versus Board of Education, for example, in regards to equal access on the basis of race. You can think about the guarantees under the Americans with Disabilities Act, for example, for students that are living with disabilities and the special protections that that emanate from that civil rights law. And then, of course, we'd be remiss if we didn't also note our specific provision in the Nebraska Constitution, which, of course, has perhaps even a stronger guarantee to Nebraska students and families to secure a high-quality educational opportunity on a free basis. And really, when you look, speaking very again, top lines, at some of the jurisprudence in Nebraska that's really kind of tested that provision to figure out, what does that mean when it comes to student funding issues? And what the court has generally said is that that's your decision. That's your decision as a legislature to really breathe life into that provision for the most part. And again, this very kind of cursory overview of that. And that's why I think this, a continual investigation and examination of these issues is so important to upholding that duty, to make sure that how we assess these issues in terms of access, really makes sense in a modern world. And so the ACLU has passed out a recent study by the Urban Institute, which actually details a really nice overview of how different states look at some of these issues and provides kind of a nice analysis of what some of our sister states are doing that might be worth taking a look at. Of course, putting a finer point on things, looking at things like the school lunch program or for free or reduced lunch can be a rational way to take this up, of course, with some wrinkles from the pandemic that we heard about earlier, which will need to be taken into account. other states maybe are pegging access and eligibility for some of these programs more consistent with other safety net programs like Medicaid or SNAP or child care programs. And so that's another kind of familiar level that you might want to take a peek at. And then, of course, it's, I think, been a bit of time since it's been updated, and I know there might be some other testifiers behind us here today, but there are other ways to really look at family need, like, for example, the state-specific Nebraska self-sufficiency standard, which really looks hard at family size and location to really get a better understanding of what families in Nebraska need to keep their head above water, and is a kind of more modern alternative look at some of those issues outside of the traditional federal poverty guidelines. So with that, I think I got it all in, and Spike would probably be satisfied with that. So happy to answer any questions.
Questions from the committee? Senator Day?
Yes.
Thank you for being here today. I
Sure.
appreciate your testimony. What did you say that last tool was that you mentioned that was an alternative to using?
Yeah, and this is really kind of a walk down memory lane. So I started my career at Nebraska Appleseed before I joined the legislature. And during that time, they worked with folks like Voices for Children to put together what they called a family self-sufficiency standard.
Okay.
So it really looked at things like family size, a specific location of where folks lived, and took into account, the fact that childcare makes up a big bulk of a modern family's expenses versus some of the traditional kind of federal poverty guidelines, which have a different way of calculating eligibility and maybe don't take into account things like that. So
Wonderful.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Any other questions?
thank you. Thank you so much
Thanks
for your
for
time and
coming.
for the generous invitation. We appreciate it.
Sure, thank you. Good information. Our next testifier is Eric Saviano from Nebraska Appleseed.
Good afternoon. Hello. My name is Eric Saviano, E-R-I-C, Saviano, S-A-V-A-I-A-N-O, and I am the Economic Justice Program Manager for Food and Nutrition Access at Nebraska Appleseed. Nebraska Appleseed is a nonprofit law and policy organization that fights for justice and opportunity for all Nebraskans, and I'm happy to speak with you all today about this important issue. I think I'll reiterate some of the points made by previous speakers and probably defer some questions to the following speaker, but I am happy to share our experience as advocates for the National School Lunch Program, School Breakfast Program, Summer Meals Program. We work within the child nutrition programs within Nebraska and nationally in partnership with the Department of Ed and nutrition services generally. So happy to answer questions about certain things as well. I think I'll reiterate, first of all, off script, that I appreciate this conversation about poverty levels being linked to the free and reduced price lunch application. I think there's a challenge when we're talking about poverty measures used for the 30, 40, 50 different things that school districts use all the time with those numbers, and also the reality of child hunger, that programs like CEP designed to support students and districts in eliminating all administrative burden and in helping kids actually get fed are paramount to our advocacy efforts at Appleseed, and appreciate this opportunity to consider different options when, with that in mind, that these originally were designed to help kids eat. All right, so maybe back a little bit to script. So we are advocates at Nebraska Appleseed for the community eligibility provision. And again, it is an option that allows students and parents to receive meals, breakfast and lunch at no cost to the family. To reduce administrative burdens, it does require that districts not use the free and reduced price lunch meal applications and use an alternative poverty measure instead. The alternative poverty measure used with CEP could be an alternative with supplements for the free and reduced price lunch application, as previous speakers said. Direct certification is what most of this testimony talks about, and how it could be a fairly simple switch over, although a growing pain most likely for districts, as we've seen with CEP take up. Again, I'll just reiterate some of the pieces of it. Direct certification data matches DHHS data to allow students to directly qualify without a free and reduced price lunch application. So they would receive free meals if those students receive or are on means tested programs run by the state, public benefits such as the SNAP program, the Medicaid program, TANF, called ADC in Nebraska, FDIPR, or Food Distribution Program on Indian Reservations, Head Start, foster care, homeless, runaway, and migrant. Those categories of data are already kept by districts around our state and managed in part by the Department of Health and Human Services and the districts themselves. So by pulling data from these existing and verifiable state sources, direct certification eliminates most of the annual paperwork for the free and reduced price lunch meal forms. It saves times for parents, and it saves time for the schools and districts who have to collect all those forms. There are some challenges I wanted to note specifically about the direct certification problem. It tends to undercount immigrant populations. As we said, these are programs that are means tested, and so participation in SNAP requires an income requirement as well as a immigration status requirement. So in areas that have a high free and reduced application population, they might have a lower relatively direct certification population. That's not to mention those who are eligible but not participating in programs for various reasons. The direct cert does not capture all of those folks. Another challenge we've seen is just the switchover, and as it disrupts the 30, 40, 50 things that districts use with free and reduced applications. And we've seen pushback for the CEP program from administrators who are getting ready to make that switch. I think in general, I'll answer a quick question from Senator Linehan and open it to any others, but to qualify for free meals in Nebraska, you have to be under the 130% federal poverty level. For reduced price meals, you have to have 185% free and reduced price meals. The direct certification system uses Medicaid data in Nebraska, and the Department of Health and Human Services allows districts to count the Medicaid free population. They actually separate all, they don't allow all CHIP kids. So kids on CHIP are Medicaid populations. They don't allow all those kids in, just the kids that meet the income requirement of that 185% for direct certification. So that's a lot of numbers. And happy to answer any other questions. Thank you.
Any other questions from the committee? Senator Linehan?
Thank you very much.
Sure.
So the CHIP eligibility is higher. It's like 200. And you
I think it's about,
obviously know these numbers. So
I think it's between 210 and 220 is
Okay.
what I've been told.
okay. So since you work in this, what are you hearing on the national level? It seems to me that we'll probably never go back to charging children for lunch or breakfast. Is that what you're hearing at the national level? Is there a push?
I'd be excited about that. I've been hearing that, well, the most recent legislative proposal, the reconciliation bill, has the option to allow us to go to increase CEP participation options. I believe the USDA has the option again to make meals free continuously, but I think they would probably appreciate a congressional action to make that happen.
So let me ask this, is there a sunset? So lunches are free for all students now.
Correct.
Is there a sunset on that? Is that to end at some certain time?
At the current time, it's set to end at the end of this school year.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So this school year being May, June.
Yeah,
So
correct.
they have plenty of time to change that, extend the sunset.
They do. And they'll probably make a decision based off of the COVID numbers and economic numbers at that time.
Okay, thank you very much.
Any other questions from the committee? I see none. Thank you so
Thank
much
you.
for coming today. Our next testifier is from Voices for Children, Alfonso Vaca Lubisher. Is that close?
That is.
All right.
Hi, good afternoon. My name is Alfonso Vaca Lubisher. I'm going to try to attempt to spell it. ALFONSO, and then Vaca Lubisher, V as in Victor, ACA, LUBISCHER. Good afternoon. I am the research coordinator for Voices for Children in Nebraska. At Voices for Children, we work to build pathways to opportunity for all children and families through research, policy, and community engagement. I'm glad to be here today to share a little bit about exploring alternative measures to free or reduced lunch as a proxy of student need for state-funded education-related programs as proposed by this legislative resolution. A big challenge for education systems across the state, as in much of the country, it is closing the persistent and growing opportunity gap between different groups of students. Among all high school juniors in Nebraska, for example, half are proficient in math. Yet 15% of migrant students, 13% of homeless students, and 19% of African American students in Nebraska, also in the same grade, can claim the same. This is more than a 30 percentage point gap between the students. In order to understand gaps like this, we must acknowledge that there are environmental factors outside of the control of the school that affect student performance and attainment. These factors include economic hardships, racial and disability discrimination, exposure to violence, illness, and parental death, among many, many others. This type of adverse childhood experiences are linked to negative impacts on education, relationships, and overall health. According to the CDC, the toxic stress from adverse childhood experiences can change the brain development and affect things as attention, decision-making, learning, and response to stress. While the current free and reduced lunch metric may partially describe the economic disadvantage, it does not and cannot possibly capture the depth of adversity that many of our students face. A simple alternative for replacing free and reduced lunch would be to use a metric from the U.S. Census Bureau, such as the poverty rate in areas where children attend schools and neighborhoods where they live. The poverty rate is a relatively equal proxy for determining student needs. This would eliminate the administrative burden currently placed on schools and districts with regard to collecting applications and free reduced meals. I would also like to highlight that the proposals that my colleagues have presented before me also sound great to me upon hearing them. However, replacing free and reduced lunch data with single metrics such as poverty rate still fails to capture the complexity of student needs that I have described previously. In the long run, a better way to determine school needs would be to create an adversity index. An adversity index would account for a unique set of experiences of each student that may have a negative impact on our education and well-being. The first step to build such a framework is to capture the number and magnitude of obstacles a student must overcome in order to be at a similar starting point as their classmates. An index would recognize that not one variable causes and therefore could fix the opportunity gap. The great thing about building such an index is that it would not require much more data than that which already exists and is highly reliable, such as that from the U.S. Census Bureau, the CDC, USDA, and the Nebraska Department of Education. Some of these variables include student-level data, such as race, gender, migrant, and disability status, school-level data, such as student mobility rate and proficiency rate, and community-level data, including the life expectancy, poverty rate, and food accessibility in the neighborhoods where the students live. I have personally worked on prototyping such an index while in my previous job, working alongside Chicago Public Schools. And I can attest that this is an attainable task. Additionally, and I think more importantly, this is something that has already been implementing in different school systems. Chicago Public Schools, for instance, which serves around 340,000 students, recently implemented an opportunity index to ensure the equitable distribution of $525 million in new funding to ensure that those most impacted by inequity have strong, vibrant, and healthy school communities. Nebraska could also adopt an approach that invests in our students and schools holistically. In conclusion, students across Nebraska face a diverse set of adverse experiences that can negatively affect their educational outcomes. The number and depth of these adversities are not captured by our current free and reduced lunch metric, which is used to determine need for state-funded education-related programs. In the short run, a metric such as the poverty rate could serve as a proxy for determining school needs. In the long run, we need a new framework to understand and address all the obstacles our students face in order to invest properly in strong, vibrant, and healthy school communities where all our students can flourish. Thank you, and I'll be happy to take any questions.
Thank you. Questions from the committee? Senator Day.
Thank you, Chairwoman Walz, and thank you for being here today. I appreciate your testimony. The idea of an adversity index, I think, is a fascinating concept because, like you said, it's multifaceted, which would be a more accurate, you would end up with a more accurate depiction of the highest needs.
Mm-hmm.
And you said that you previously worked on prototyping such an index while working alongside Chicago Public Schools. In what capacity were you working at that time, and what would that look like in the state of Nebraska? Who would be developing this type of index?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, so I was working for a nonprofit that pretty much worked hand in hand. We try to do kind of like a consultancy with Chicago Public Schools. We did different projects and kind of we try to introduce new things that we've seen. So we kind of got this idea from the San Antonio Public Schools who have applied such a thing. And so with that, my capacity as an analyst for that, it was just kind of taking some of their data and then just developing how it would look if we would invest a certain amount, say $100 million, how each school would get the money. So in the sense, it was just kind of partnering with their equity office and then kind of working alongside them to see if this is something be a right fit for them. I left the position before they implemented this opportunity index, but it was part of those conversations that we had with them. In terms of how we implement it here, Voices for Children is more than happy to collaborate, but I think having a coalition of people who work together to approach this more scientifically, right, as to what are the metrics and variables that affect educational outcomes and how do you apply them in a policy setting. So I think, our organization would be more than happy, and I'm sure others would be happy to.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you.
Any other questions? Senator Merman.
Thank you. You've got a list there of hardships that determine, how well students perform. You've got parental death in there, but I notice you don't have anything that, if it's a two-parent family or a one-parent family or divorce, that type of thing. Do you have any research on that at all?
Yeah, absolutely. And in our previous, in the prototype that I built in Chicago, we use a single parent household, mostly because those families do get to have a little bit more challenges in terms of other things like transportation and childcare and stuff. So definitely there are many variables that we have looked at before, but yes, single parent households and divorces is one that does affect education.
How about divorce?
So
one way or the other?
Divorce specifically, we just look at single parent households. We don't know if it's divorced or never married and stuff, but it does definitely have an effect on educational outcomes.
Thank you. Got one more question.
Yes, Senator Merman.
In the adversity index, I guess it's not the adversity index. The simple alternative for replacing free and reduced lunch is kind of the top of page 2 there,
Mhm.
you talk about the poverty rate in the school district where the student attends.
That's right.
I can see maybe a problem with that where you would encourage, or if that would happen, it would encourage students to stay in low-performing schools rather than if they do have the opportunity to move away or attend a school in a place away from the poverty area.
Sure.
Do you see that as being a problem using that criteria?
Generally, and specifically when I have kind of work with parents, essentially what they try to do is try to get out of those neighborhoods, right? And try to go to different schools who already have better programs, have much more resources. And so I'm sure it could happen, but for the most part, pretty much people vote with their feet. Once they have enough resources, they want to move to a different neighborhood that takes them away from certain communities or certain places where the children do experience, as I was talking about, the adverse childhood experiences, where, get away from poverty or get away from these places that definitely do affect their development. So I do think from what I've seen, it does not deter people from, changing their kind of from moving per se once they have the means to.
But in other words, you don't think it would encourage families to keep their student in a low-performing poverty area school?
No, I don't think so. Unless, of course, that school is improving, right? And then we see that because of the new resources coming into the school with a new index, for example, of how we distribute the funds, they might see, well, this school where my kids have friends or whatever, it looks like it's coming together and it's improving. So that may actually help, which is essentially what we want, right? We want people to stay in their schools if they want to, as long as we can improve the quality of the schools.
Sure. Thank you.
Senator Linehan.
Thank you, Chairwoman Walsh. So does the U.S. Census data, do they do continual every year data on these things? So so you wouldn't like once every 10 years. This would be every year be updated, right?
Yeah, and when I say this U.S. Census Bureau, they collect many different types of data. I mostly would be using the American Community Survey, which comes out every year, with a little caveat that 2020 was a little different. They're doing some experimental data now, but for the most part, they come out with it every year. And so that's what we use. And usually what I have done in the past is use it at the census tract level. So we could identify where the students live. We can just kind of narrow it down to more specific geographies as opposed to kind of like an entire county or an entire school district. So it can get pretty granular.
Census blocks, yeah. Okay, thank you very much.
Yes, of course.
Any other questions? I see none. Thank you so much
All
for
right.
coming today.
Thank you so much.
And that will end our hearing on LR 180. And we will open on LR 182, introduced by Senator Walls, an interim study to examine the school enrollment options available to students. All right, good afternoon, colleagues. This interim study was introduced to help us as a committee better understand the option enrollment program in Nebraska, strictly from a policy perspective. Over the last several years, option enrollment, which provides public school choice to students across the state, has been a focus of introduced legislation, floor amendments, and policy discussions. I believe that it is important that we take some time during the interim to better understand this policy. What is working? Are there aspects of the policy that could be improved upon? I want to specifically focus today's discussion on the policy surrounding option enrollment and reserve the funding of option enrollment for future discussion. Like you, I'm excited to hear what our invited testifiers have to share on this topic. And with that, we will open. What happened to my list? With the first testifier, Dr. Andy Rickley from Papillion La Vista Schools.
Good afternoon and greetings from Sarpy County, where it's always blue skies and downhill and shady. My name is Andy Rickley. My last name is spelled R-I-K-L-I, and I am the superintendent of the Papillion La Vista Community Schools. Senator Walls, members of the Education Committee, thank you for introducing LR 182 and taking the time to examine the issue of option enrollment and its future in the great state of Nebraska. I represent the 4th largest public school district in Nebraska with over 12,000 students spread across 21 school buildings. In a previous role, I served as the Director of Administrative Services for the Westside Community Schools, where I oversaw the option enrollment program. Finally, I bring the perspective of a researcher, having analyzed the impact of option enrollment programs as part of my doctoral dissertation, which I completed in 2007. My purpose here today is to provide an overview of the program, highlight some of the benefits and challenges associated with option enrollment, and to outline a sample of research findings that were related to my doctoral research. Option and open enrollment programs, which I'll kind of use those terms interchangeably, but as the committee is probably well aware, open enrollment does have a distinction that is directly related to the learning community law. We can talk about that if you like. But broadly defined, these programs allow students to attend a school district or a school building that is found outside their regular attendance area. According to the ECS, 47 states and the District of Columbia currently offer some type of option enrollment. So these programs are very common, they're very pervasive. Generally, option enrollment programs are typically classified as either intra-district, which allows students to transfer between districts, or inter-district, which allow students to transfer within a district from one building to the next. Some states offer both. Nebraska is one of those. Furthermore, some states across the union do allow transportation, and in fact, some require transportation, again, which makes reference to open enrollment. The Nebraska Legislature established its program in 1989 and implemented the program fully in 1990-91. Incidentally, I was an option enrollment program student. This program allows K-12 students from any school district in the state to attend any other public school district in the state of Nebraska as long as there is capacity. There are limits to our program, as this committee is aware, which are outlined in State Statute 79-234. Students are generally limited to one move per address. Families may request a specific school building, but the district may decline if capacity doesn't exist, or in some cases, they may say, we do not have room at this building, but there is capacity at that building. So that's a very important limitation. Transportation or reimbursement for transportation is required only for those students who qualify for free, not reduced lunch. And finally, receiving school districts may establish standards, including capacity, which we previously mentioned, but school districts are not allowed to take into account other factors such as a student's individual athletic accomplishments or academic record. A review of educational research lists many benefits associated with these types of programs, including enhanced parent and student satisfaction and increased academic outcomes for students, which I'll talk about in just a little bit. By most measures, Nebraska's program has been a great success. Thousands of Nebraska students every year attend public school districts outside their regular attendance area. Likewise, many school districts have been able to maintain or increase their student population through option enrollment, with several districts across Nebraska having sizable numbers of option enrollment students. Finally, option enrollment offers Nebraska families choice. Nebraska has a robust offering of school choice options, including option enrollment, but would also include private and parochial schools, magnets, focus schools, online schools, and of course, homeschooling. Option enrollment programs are not without criticism, of course. It's been suggested these programs do not lead to increased student achievement, nor are they a universal option for all families, particularly those that lack the capacity to provide transportation for their student. Others complain that option enrollment siphons away students from districts who count on student enrollment for operational efficiencies. Lastly, it's been suggested that some families have used option enrollment to attend schools for athletic reasons rather than academic ones. There are valid arguments on both sides of the issue that warrant future study and consideration. Before I close, I would like to provide just a few brief snippets from my doctoral research. Though my research is quite limited, it's almost 15 years old, and it was focused on the Westside Community Schools program, which had about a third of its students through option enrollment. But I think there are still lessons to be learned today. My study looked at 3 different academic outcomes: academic progress, engagement, and behavior. In short, on all 3 measures, option enrollment students performed equal to, and in some cases better than, resident students. That's a really important distinction, since sometimes within some districts, there is tension between resident families, I'm a taxpayer here, compared to students that come in from the outside. They're not paying taxes here. They should have a lower level of service. The results of this research support the assertion that all students, both residents and option, perform at comparable levels, regardless of address or residency status. It is my opinion that this program has been a great success, but there certainly is room for improvement. I see that I'm at red, so I'll wrap up my comments, but I'll gladly take any questions from the chair or members of the committee. And thank you for allowing me to speak.
Thank you. Questions from the committee? Senator Day.
Thank you, Chairwoman Wilson. Thank you, Dr. Rickley, for being here today, representing my alma mater, Papillion, Vista. You said when you did research on West Side, you said approximately a third of their students were option enrollment.
Correct.
How many option enrollment students does Papillion La Vista have?
So we have a relatively small number of students. We have 12,000 total. We have a net gain of just under 200 students. The reason why our number is significantly smaller than Westside Community Schools is Westside is a mature district. That is, it's done growing. It is landlocked. Papillion La Vista, as you well know, is a proud graduate. It is a growing district. So very frequently what you'll find in fast growing districts, your Gretnas, your Elkhorns, your Benningtons, your Papillion La Vistas, that they have a very small number of option enrollment students because we're trying to build buildings to first and foremost meet the capacity of our resident population. So it would be very rare for us to accept option enrollment students at high school, for example. We typically have a few spots available at our early grades in elementary, but it would be very, very unusual to allow students in at either the middle school or high school.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Other questions from the committee? Senator Linehan.
Thank you, Chairwoman Wells, and thank you for being here, Dr. Rickley. What are the parameters around who decides the capacity? That's one of the complaints I've heard, like who decides what the capacity is? And
Yeah, thank you for the question, Senator Linehan. And it's important for both option and open enrollment. School districts, particularly under open enrollment, were required to set capacity instruments is what they were called. And then we actually submitted them to the learning community building by building. So for example, we have 21 buildings, and for each building, we would say, this is what our capacity is for each of those buildings. Different districts use different approaches, but very frequently the 2 big factors that school districts most frequently look at when establishing those criteria, they look at the number of classrooms available, and then they look at the amount of raw square footage. And again, there are some differences from district to district, and even the age of the building and the size of the classrooms in terms of how they determine that. But very frequently, once those capacities have been established, and then you roll over the number of resident students that you have in that particular building, that determines then if there's any slack or any extra capacity. In our district, for example, our sweet spot for an elementary building is 450 students. So what we do each spring is we look at rolling up numbers and the number of incoming kindergartners. Do we think we'll hit that number of 450? If so, if we're at that 450 or above, we say that building is closed for open enrollment. But if we do have a little bit of slack, particularly at a specific grade level, we'll say, we'll allow X number of spots at this building at that grade level. And then that's what drives our decision making.
so you also said something about free and reduced lunch families receiving transportation, but I thought we did away with transportation.
So another really good question. So under open enrollment, under the learning community, if you added to the diversity of the building, that is a full pay student into a high poverty building, that full pay student actually would qualify, and vice versa. If it was a free and reduced lunch student coming into a less poverty dense building, they would receive transportation. Option enrollment treats it a little bit different. They basically say, if you qualify for free, not reduced, but free, we'll either provide your transportation or we'll reimburse you for it as long as you're keeping track of your mileage.
So that's true now?
Under
If it's
option,
Free, if it's free.
correct.
Right.
Correct. So if under option currently today, if a student qualifies for free lunch and is coming into Papillion La Vista Community Schools, we either provide the transportation or we cut checks typically twice a year to reimburse that family for the cost of the transportation.
So who decides, let's say you have 10 in one building, let's say you have 5 slots in the 5th grade. Who decides who those 5 kids are?
Yeah, thank you, Senator. Each district does it a little bit differently. In my opinion, what typically happens is if you have more applications than you have space available, they do some type of randomized lottery. When I was at Westside, for example, we would load the kids in, not by name. We would assign them just a random number. We'd put them in a randomized spreadsheet and run a function where it just randomly pulled however many slots you had available. Whoever was chosen was selected and allowed in, and then the remainder that weren't selected randomly, unfortunately, weren't able to make it in.
So is that the way every school system does it?
Yeah, I can't speak for that, Senator. I
So there are
suspect
no
most
rules?
are.
Are there any rules around how you do it?
None that I'm aware of. I suspect maybe some of the testifiers coming in behind me, Senator, can speak to that. My guess is, in my experience in conversations with other superintendents, some type of a randomized lottery is very common.
But there's no rule.
Not that I'm aware of.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you for the question.
Other questions? Senator Lenahan asked mine, so I don't have any.
I appreciate that, Senator Walls. And thank you for allowing me to speak. It means a lot.
Thank you so much for
Have
being here.
a good afternoon.
You too. Oh, I do. Our next testifier is Jack Moles from NERC.
Good afternoon, Senator Walls, members of the Education Committee. My name is Jack Moles. That's Jack Moles. I'm the Executive Director of the Nebraska Rural Community Schools Association, also known as NERCSA. Wish to thank Senator Walls for the invitation to provide input today. And I also want to thank Nicole Barrett for helping me in finding out, okay, where's the scope of where you want to go with this? And so between us, what we came up with was the idea that I would survey, provide some survey questions to our members and then bring back the results to you. So that's what I've done. Sent out the surveys to 197 members, superintendents. I received 111 responses, so about a 56% return rate. And so I'll just kind of go through the questions that Nicole and I had presented to the members. First was, did your school board set capacities to accept option enrollment students for the current year? And 51 out of the 111 said yes. So about 45, 46%, somewhere in there, said that they had set some sort of limitations. And what capacities were set, and this was all over the board. I had all sorts of numbers, so I kind of tried to narrow it down to see what I was looking at. And basically they did so on grade levels. The capacity set for grade sizes range from 18 to 100. And basically that was based really on the size of the school. A very small school might set 18, a larger NERCSA school might set 100 for a grade level. Average capacity was 35.8 for kindergarten through 6th, 44.5 for 7 through 12. And as Dr. Rickley said, really was based on, actually I found 3 things. He talked about capacities due to the size of the individual classrooms and also the sheer number of classrooms available. But also cited by NERCSA members were the capacities due to the number of teachers per grade level. Some districts did set special education capacities. Most commonly cited were 2 things, either 15 student caseload per teacher. And the other was that if an application for a student with needs that would require the district to hire another staff member, they would normally disallow that application. One that I did want to point out, one set a maximum of 8 in its behavioral program. It had a behavioral program that probably looked to me like it was a magnet for districts in the area to pull kids in. If your district publicizes its capacity limits, how and when does it do so? First of all, the limits were set either through board policy or through a board resolution. And of course, both those require a board action. Most of them said that either policy or the resolution was reviewed and set annually, anywhere from January all the way even into June, some of them said, but most of us seem to be talking about the spring, kind of an April, May, March time frame. Most common methods of publication, they were varied on that also. Board of Education meeting minutes published in the local paper, on the school's website, articles in the local newspaper about the Board of Education meeting where the action was taken, the district's annual report, and then articles placed in the local newspaper about the limitations specifically. Typically, does your school have a net positive or negative number of enrolled students? 64 of the respondents said they were net positive, 41 were net negative, and 6 were net neutral. So not considering the funding of option students, what aspects of the current option enrollment policy are working well? And one of the things we pointed out was don't take funding into consideration. They did a really nice job with that, by the way. They didn't even mention the funding part of it. So they talked about the things that were going well. Most common was that it does give parents the greater school choice for their kids. Also identified some other things there. For example, fresh start, access to programs or classes that kids might not otherwise have, convenience for families based on where their parents worked, those types of things. There were also some cited that were benefits to the school district. For example, a smaller school or smaller schools that got more kids in, that did help them, to grow their programs and their offerings. Schools could more easily project their enrollments and staffing needs. And then it talked about, one of the things we asked was, again, not considering funding. I'm out of time there. Do you want me to, what do you want me to do there?
Yeah, I'd like you to finish.
Okay. Again, not considering funding, what aspects of the policy could be improved upon. The greatest number of responses were they would like schools to have a better handle on being able to have the ability to say no if a student had really bad discipline issues, attendance issues, academic issues. Though that was the thing that was pointed out the most. Other things that could be improved upon, the limited number of options available to a student could be increased. Some parents, one of the things that I have heard of going on, I'd never had it happen to me, but when I was a superintendent, but some parents have opted their kids out of the SPED program where their kids were, in order to be able to get into the school, into the option school, if the school had capped their SPED program already. Recruiting of option kids by other schools was seen as a negative by some. Need for better coordination and clarification of dates, including both what are, run the option enrollment program, but also coordinating with the NSA for eligibility dates. Some talked about the high proportion of negative academic or behavioral issues that desire to opt into the district. So those are a few of the negative things or things that could be improved upon. And how does your school district address students that want to option in on a part-time basis? And every superintendent said they haven't had that come up yet. But several of them did say they do allow that for homeschooled kids from within the district. They allow them to come in, and they assume they would probably handle that the same way with an option student that had that request. But they don't have anything in policy or anything to do that. A few did say that their districts don't offer or don't allow for part-time enrollment with their resident kids, so they probably wouldn't do it with option kids too. And then one thing that I added that Nicole and I had not talked about, but I just asked the superintendents, okay, in your opinion, what's the magic number of how many times a kid ought to be able to option? And gave them options of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then unlimited. And 64%, 71 out of the 111 said 1 was the magic number to them, but 27% said 2. And then the next most popular was unlimited, which 6 of them said there should be unlimited. So I can try to answer any questions you have.
Thank you, Jack. Questions from the committee? I did have one. I can't find it. Oh, Senator Monahan, sorry.
So it's been brought to my attention, I think the person was going to testify, it's not going to be here today, but kids who are in a different school district or private school, and they want to take a class at Lincoln Public Schools. And it seems like if they're in the Lincoln Public School system, that's okay. But if they're in the Waverly system, then Lincoln says, no, I'm not sure this is true. It's hearsay. But for an example, let's say,
Mhm.
Is that a legislative fix we need to do? Because it seems to me if we're treating those kids different than we are option kids. So if I'm a child in LPS and I want to go to Waverly, I get funding from the state. If I'm in Waverly and I want to go to Lincoln, they're funded by the state. So why couldn't we figure out some way to
Yeah, and I didn't come across that.
unscramble
issue.
that?
Yeah, I don't have an answer for you, I guess.
Okay.
I didn't come across that in what I was getting from the superintendents.
Right. But you lay out here pretty clearly that when it comes to special ed kids, there's a resistance. Unless it's like a speech where they've already got a speech pathologist, but I mean, some people would call it discriminatory.
Right. And I've heard that. And you and I have talked about that before. There was an overwhelming number of the superintendents said they had that, but some of them did, and I wanted to bring them up to share them with you.
All right, thank you.
You're welcome. And by the way, I used the 15 number was cited in there of 15 student caseload for special ed. And that actually, I think it's still in, but at one time the Department of Ed had it. It wasn't a requirement, but it was kind of a suggested maximum number of caseload.
Well, that seems like
yeah.
a pretty significant caseload.
Yeah.
And then the other one where you said the 35 students per class, that means 2 teachers have 18 kids.
Yes.
So, yeah, I understand that. Thank you.
Welcome.
Any other questions? I see none. Thanks so much for coming today.
Thank you.
That was the question. Next testifier is Lauren Vargas from Education Rights Council.
Members of the committee, my name is Lauren Misek Vargas, spelled LaurenMisekVargas. It's long, I apologize. I'm here on behalf of Education Rights Council, where I serve as an executive director, and I'm also an attorney practicing in education law. Education Rights Council works to remove legal barriers to educational equity across the state of Nebraska. Nebraska's open enrollment statute is one such barrier when it comes to open enrollment for students with disabilities. Nebraska's current option enrollment law on its face permits a school board to adopt a resolution that says we have no availability for students with disabilities. The district does not have to provide any supporting information and doesn't have to pass that new resolution every year. Once at any time in the past will suffice. The district doesn't have to justify the availability or lack thereof with any statistics or facts. The district doesn't have to announce what availability, quote unquote, means, and the district doesn't have to show it has a lack of capacity to serve. The net result of Nebraska's language is that most districts have set their capacity to take an option, students with disabilities at a 0. Districts have gone so far as to refuse to accept students who are not receiving special education services if they have a disability, under the grounds that they could be called to serve the students at any point in the future. A review of all contested open enrollment cases since 1998 concerning special education capacity, reveals that every single case upheld in the school district's right to deny enrollment of a student. The answer to any family who seeks to enroll a child is often, sorry, our special education program is full. Schools are expressly permitted to accept members of a family via option who don't have disabilities and simply can reject a family member who does, even if that family is in the same school district. Even worse, while a factual determination as to capacity is subject to challenge, the school board decision has the presumption of validity and reasonableness, and it is up to families to prove that the decision is invalid. Yet districts don't have to maintain or provide any data that would reveal the capacity situation. Thus, the situation has obviously become problematic. In the most recent case concerning a denial of enrollment, 1919, the State Board of Education actually found that the school district had not established that its special education program was at or over capacity. And the district did not set a specific capacity of its special education program as required by Nebraska statute, and did not adopt a resolution declaring its program was at capacity as a requirement by Nebraska statute. However, they still had to affirm the denial of option of enrollment. Nebraska does not align with other states that have open option enrollment laws. For example, Arizona law requires annual excess capacity determinations, and applications from applicants with special needs are to be sent to the district's Director of Student Services to make a determination about whether the school has capacity and resources to serve the student. When an Arizona district website and letters to parents regarding open enrollment district flatly declared that students with disabilities were not eligible for open enrollment because their special education programs, were at capacity, the Office of Civil Rights determined this to be a discrimination on the basis of disability. In another case, the OCR, or Office of Civil Rights, found that a district that capped the enrollment of special education students at 10% of the total population of each grade level was discriminatory. As in the earlier case, the OCR found a violation of Section 501 because the district failed to individually consider whether it had the resources or capacity to provide the services required by an individual student's IEP. Wisconsin also has an open enrollment program, and it does permit a district to deny a student option if it lacks the services or space necessary to meet a child's special education needs. The Wisconsin law was reviewed by the Seventh Circuit, and it was upheld because under Wisconsin law, the decision has to be based on actual attributes of an individual's disability. Wisconsin's data shows that over 60% of students who applied for option enrollment with disabilities were actually accepted. Nebraska differs from Wisconsin because we don't require looking at the specific needs of students applying and making decisions on their actual capacity to meet the needs of individual students. We do not require annual staff to student ratios, notice of students in classrooms, and we actually permit caps based solely on disability status, not on an actual individual need. Nebraska's law, thus, is discriminatory. There may be cases in Nebraska where districts cannot meet a child's need, but we cannot continue to permit districts to generalize about children with disabilities. Prior to making option enrollment decisions, districts should annually, Madam Chair, I realize that I am out of time. Would you like me to continue?
You just have a little bit more.
Just a little bit more, sorry. Districts should annually look at where they have capacity, school by school, grade by grade, and then make individual decisions based on the student's individual circumstances in light of those annual capacity decisions. Education Rights Council proposes amending 79238 to require annual adoption of specific capacity standards for option students, not on the basis of disability. Districts should publish and report the capacity of classrooms, buildings, and grade levels in light of that enrollment. Prior to October 15th of each school year, districts should declare what grade levels, programs, classes will be unavailable to the next school year due to the lack of capacity. We propose that the district then make an individual determination to their ability to appropriately serve the student based on the student's needs. We urge you for the consideration of changing this bill. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Questions from the committee? Senator Day.
Thank you, Chairwoman Walls, and thank you, Ms. Vargas, for being here today.
Thank
It's
you so
nice
much
to
for
see
having
you.
us.
So this is obviously very troubling. So help me understand, in terms of option enrollment, districts, there's no guidelines on how individual districts will determine if they have to accept a special education student or not. They can say we're at capacity. They don't have to verify any of that. And so they can essentially reject that student based on the fact that they would need supports because of an IEP. But then if the student is at a private school and they need services provided that school cannot provide, they would go to the public school system to receive services. Am I understanding the situation correctly, or?
And I don't want to misquote you,
Okay.
but I'm going to try to answer your question.
Okay.
In regards to public school students, and I should state that Education Rights Council really focuses on public school. But in regards to those students, what happens is that if they are seeking open enrollment, or excuse me, option to switch over, the school does not have to provide that information. They can base it capacity on their own metrics, and it doesn't have to be given an explicit reason why that child was denied. In fact, we've had students who come from the exact same family where their siblings, I think I mentioned that in my testimony, their siblings have been accepted, but the one child with the disability has not been accepted, and there's been no reason offered. In regards to a private school student, that is guided by a different set of laws, and I can provide that information to you at another time if that works for you.
Yeah, that would be great. I'm just trying to sort of unravel some of the issues of, where special ed students are going and where they would like to go, and who ends up paying to provide services to the student and all of those types of things.
I
So-
can only speak to my personal experience with students who are in private schools who have disabilities. Normally, it is the home school that then provides that service. But if they are seeking to then option out of their home school to provide the special education service, that's the information I would need to give to you.
Okay, thank you.
No problem.
Senator Linehan.
Thank you, Chairwoman Walls. So just to follow up on Senator Day's question, I think I know the answer, but just get on the record. So if a child lives in a school district and needs special ed services, by federal law, they have to be provided those services, regardless of whether they're in that homeschool or private school or homeschooled. That child, by federal law, is to get the services if they're in the district.
That is correct. It's just the level of services that then could be provided. So the amount of hours may differ, or those accommodations may differ. But yes, if a private school student has a special education, they should be provided those services.
Right, because it's the federal law.
Correct.
Thank you.
Other questions, Senator Merman?
Thank you, Chairwoman Walls. Mine just went blank. Sorry, I just forgot what I was going to ask. You can come back to me. Probably think of it. Well, I know what I was going to ask. If a school calls says that their special ed system is full, they only have to say that once. They don't have to, once forever, if I understood your testimony.
The
correctly.
school board has to just designate a resolution or a policy that with students with disabilities, they are at capacity, and they only have to do that once. In terms of the law, in terms of appealing it, that is all that the State Board of Education will consider. And as long as it's been decided or has been provided as a resolution at one time in the past, then it will be upheld. And in our circumstances, we have many, many families calling us with this particular issue. And we oftentimes say we can't represent you because it's not worth the appeal, because it will be upheld based off of how the law is currently written.
So the school board could say their special ed program's full one time and it lasts for decades or in perpetuity, actually.
Correct.
Okay, yeah, that doesn't sound fair at all. And then another follow-up question, if I could. In some of these other states that you cited that option enrollment for disability students is allowed, the school district that receives the special ed student, are they reimbursed somehow from the state or from the district that the student optioned out of? Because as you know, special ed students are typically more expensive than non-special ed students, and some can be extremely expensive, of course. So how is that handled?
I will try to answer your question generally, and then for more specifics, I can provide the committee more specifics about exactly how that's handled, in particular, especially with the learning community, because it's different based off of how money is siphoned off. But generally, what happens is that when a student has special education, they have a certain dollar amount that goes along with them to their particular school. As I mentioned, though, with the learning community and the metro area, that is different, and I will have to get you the specifics of that.
Okay, well, in some of the other states that you cited, how is that dollar amount? Is it reimbursed from the state typically, or from the school district that the special ed student optioned out of?
My understanding in Wisconsin, based off of that Seventh Circuit case, is that the school district reimbursed the option school district based off of what that finances were.
Okay, thank you.
No problem. Thank you.
Any other questions from the committee? I see none. Thank you so much. Good
Thank
to
you
see
so much for your time.
Our next testifier is Jay Beller from the NSAA.
Thank you, Senator Wallace, for the opportunity to be here today. My name is Jay Beller, Jaybeellar. I'm the Executive Director of the Nebraska School Activities Association. We serve 304 member schools, public, private, parochial, with over 100,000 participants, so quite proud of that. And yeah, quite honestly, students move quite frequently from school to school. The reasons are many. The NSA strives to, number one, provide opportunity for all kids. When we allow these moves, it usually generates opportunity, which we consider to be good. Number two, we try to create an even playing field for those involved in our NSA activities. When we allow this moves, sometimes that creates hardship among schools. So we have to use this and balance. The option enrollment is one time. In our school, we mirror that with what we allow. We allow one transfer. And so I should say too that the NSA is a 9-12 organization. So we govern 9th, 10th, 11th, and 12th grade. So when they start as freshmen, they can choose their school. So you can live in the Papillion district if you want to go to Bellevue or you want to go to Omaha, and they'll let that happen. We let that happen. So as a freshman, you get to choose. Anytime after that, if you don't put your name on what we call our May 1 transfer list, then you're ineligible for 90 school days. So actually a kid could start at a school system their freshman year. And as a sophomore, if they deemed the other school to be a better fit for them, whatever their reasons are, as long as they put their name on that May 1 transfer, that start of the school year, then next year they're eligible to participate at all varsity level. If they don't, then they can go to that school, of course. We can't stop them from doing that, but they can only play in junior varsity activities. So, and part of that is we say they have to be continuously enrolled in 20 credit hours per semester at the school represents in interscholastic competition. Exempt or home schools from authorized Rule 13 schools must be continuously enrolled in a minimum of 10 credit hours of instruction per semester. And that goes back to what we talked about last year. 2.6.6 in our Constitution talks about dual enrollment. So a student enrolled in 2-member high schools, which they can, at the same time is eligible only at the high school located in the school district where his or her domicile is located. 2.6.6.1 says if both member high schools are located in his or home district, the student is eligible at the member high school where she or he is continuously enrolled in 20 credit hours. 2.6.6.2, if they're continuously enrolled in 20 credit hours in each of the member high school, then they must make a choice. And once they make that choice, that's where their eligibility is. Because a lot of times we understand that somebody in a school might take that one class and that other that they don't offer. So that's more than okay for them to do. we go back, getting back to our transfer list, an exception to our NSA, if they choose to go to a different school after they've used their option. So as a freshman, anywhere you want to go. Sometime in the next 3 years, you have one more time to use that May 1 or that option enrollment that you can use. And of course, remember, anytime their parents move into your district, eligibility starts right away. So if you're with your parent, we usually get into the case in the NSA perspective of, I want to live with grandparents because this happened, or I want to live with somebody else because this happened. And then we have to check our rules to see what they say about that move. But the May 1 says the NSA member school in which the Nebraska school transfers must notify the NSAA of transfer by entering the student's name on the NSAA May 1 list. Once they put their name on that list, they're required to go to that school for eligibility purposes. If they say they put their name on the list as soon as they do the option work in March, they have until May 1 if they want to change their mind and say, you know what, take my name off that list because I decided I want to stay with my friends. They're more than willing. That's okay. But once they go by that May 1 list, then they're hooked to that other school for eligibility. And so we've had some trouble with that. We call it our portal, just like you hear from the NCAA. In 2015, we had 929 kids transfer. 2016, 749, 744, and then this last year we're down to 578. And we attribute that to our list. Now, I should have made a copy for everybody. It's our May 1 transfer list. Now mom and dad have to sign the piece of paper saying that we're going to tell both schools. So if I'm leaving one school, you're going to know. And if I'm coming to another school, they're going to know also. We found this cause a lot of heartache for everybody involved. So I see I'm out of time, so I'll answer any questions that you may have. Thank you for the opportunity.
Yeah, thanks. Questions from the committee? Can you leave that paper and
I can leave anything that you need.
we
This
will
one
make
here?
copies for
Yep.
committee members?
Good.
Oh, Senator Merman.
Thank you, Senator Wells. What control do you have over homeschool students? How often can they transfer or?
Transfer students, or excuse me, homeschool students are only eligible. Well, first of all, I should say, as a freshman, they're like anybody else. They can choose what school they want to go to. 95% of that time, they choose the district in which their parents live in. So other than their freshman year, if they're sophomore, junior, or senior, they're required to go to the school district in which their parents live.
And what, do you have any control over whether or not they're eligible to participate in the school district?
No, that they have to be a member of the NDE. And I don't know the wording for sure. But the parents have to, of course, or whoever their teacher is, grades those kids, and their eligibility is dictated to by that parent or that teacher to that school, and they decide who's eligible or not. We do decide to make sure that we ask the schools to make sure that they're in the 10 credit hours or 2 classes enrolled at that school. Now, some schools allow them to, if they're doing that remote, they count that. Some do not. So that's up to the school district in which they attend.
Okay, thank you. So it's up to the school district and the parents. Yeah.
Correct.
Thank you.
Senator Monahan.
Thank you, Chairwoman Walls. Did you just say that homeschool kids don't have the May 1st option that the kids in school do?
They do not, because they're not a member of the Nebraska School Activities Association.
Okay.
That is for our member schools from one Nebraska school to another Nebraska school.
Okay.
Any other questions? I don't see any. Thank you so much for coming.
Thank you.
I'm glad you did. Thanks. Our next testifier is Jeremy Eckler. Jeremy is
He can't be here.
not able to be here. Yeah, he's not able to be here. He had a flight that canceled, but his testimony, you'll find committee members are in the notebook. So we will go to Brian Halstead with the NDE.
Good afternoon, Senator Walls, members of the Education Committee. For the record, my name is Brian Halstead, BrianHalstead. I'm with the Nebraska Department of Education. I just had a couple points I wanted to make this afternoon. Number one, the enrollment option program, its purpose has remained the same since 1989 when the legislature enacted it. Its purpose is to allow parents to decide what public school district their child can attend and be enrolled in. It is a public school district choice program only. That's how it was designed. That's the purpose the legislature established, and that is how it is operated. Number two, it has fundamentally remained the same throughout that entire time. Many of the requirements stated in statute have been amended because of changes in the structure of the school districts in the state or the possibilities of why kids move or parents move around to enable them to continue to have an option under the program. So in the sense, in 1989, there were over 800 school districts in the state of Nebraska. And they were organized under elementary only, K-12, or high school only school districts. So in the sense of the laws were tweaked because kids might have used enrollment option when they were a first grader to enroll in a elementary only school district, even though they lived in a K-12 school district. When they completed the grades in the elementary only school district, they got another option to pick either the high school district where they reside or another high school district. Since that time, the legislature has changed the entire structure. All of K-12 education today is under a single board of education in each school district of the state, K-12. So some of the language that's in this statute predates having just a single K-12 school district where all children reside. Number two, the fundamental premise that has been present from the beginning of the state of Nebraska is where the child resides, they get to enroll free of charge in the public school district. The enrollment option program created no, you can pick another public school district where you do not reside in order to attend. And it's largely operated that way since. The other thing I would focus on and point out to you, the role of the Department of Education is just two things. We were required to prescribe a form that school districts had to use and parents had to use when they wanted to participate in the enrollment option program. The only other duty of the department is actually with the State Board of Education. Any parent who is told no by a school district can appeal under the Administrative Procedures Act, and that parent is the petitioner in that case. Under the Administrative Procedures Act, the petitioners are required to carry the burden of proving they qualify and meet the requirements for which they should be admitted into the enrollment option program. That sometimes has turned out to be a parent taking on a school district, administrators and lawyers all by themselves, which sometimes is how does a parent prove the district is at capacity or is not at capacity? What's their ability to even know how they did that? So in that way, the structure of how the legislature wrote the appeals in many ways largely benefits the school districts themselves, not the parents using the program. So you may want to fundamentally rethink how that appeal process. The state board only reviews the statutes and either says the school district did or did not comply with the law. They do not have the an ability to weigh factors, information, and make an independent decision about what they think should happen. It's a mere application of the statutes enacted by the legislature and the facts presented by the parent, which I think several of the prior ones pointed out the unfairness of that. The act does specifically say that school districts cannot focus on whether a child is in special education, yet the legislature then wrote language about, but schools can determine the capacity of classes, grades, and programs, for which you've now heard. Program includes special education. So inherently, even though you say it's not to be done by statute, you've authorized it to be done. And finally, since I see my light is turned red, I would mention part-time enrollment is an entirely different statute in Nebraska and is not part of enrollment option, and parents and others confuse that concept. Right now, there has never been a statute that governs how a parent can enroll their child in a private denominational or parochial school. That's up to the parent and that school as to what's required. So in that regard, there are requirements that are needed for a parent who chooses to have their child enrolled in an exempt school to have that exempt school recognized by the department as being a school for statutory purposes and for purposes of the compulsory attendance law. So I will stop there. I will try to answer any questions you might have about enrollment options.
Thank you. Question, Senator Lenahan.
Thank you very much for being here, Mr. Halstead. Okay, you said the state board developed the form, right?
No, the State Department was required to prescribe the form to be used, which it did in the early, whenever the Act 1990, there was a form created. It has been adapted based on changes and tweaks in the statute, yes.
Okay, but so the Department of Ed, not the board, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
So Department of Ed, and isn't one of the first questions on the form, does this child have an IEP?
There are numerous questions, and you are correct. There are questions that deal with,
It's like halfway down, first question.
yeah, there's a box. Does the student receive special education services? Yes or no?
Yes. Okay, so why do you suppose the Department of Ed had that question on there?
Because school districts needed to know that, to know the services they were going to be able to provide to the child so that they could make a determination as to whether they had staff who could provide that service to that child, or whether they didn't have capacity right now in their district because they don't offer that type of program to a special education child. That's why it's there.
So
Inherently reading this, I look at that and go, well, you say it shouldn't be based on special education, yet one of the questions right out of the box asks that question.
Yes,
Yeah.
I've known that for a couple of years now.
Yeah.
So good for the history lesson.
Yeah.
But you keep saying this is what's in statute, but
It is.
it's within our ability to change that. right?
Absolutely, Senator. I think the whole purpose of this study is for you to look at the statutes your predecessors in this body established to see whether that language still meets the needs of parents, students, and school districts. More than happy to work with you on updating this language to make it better for parents, students, and school districts.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Thank you very much for being here.
You're welcome. And just for the staff and the committee to understand, I did provide to the research analyst the individual numbers for school districts and broken out by the student demographics of those students in all of the school districts who are participating in the enrollment option program. So staff has that both for the 1920 and the 2021 school year. In that regard, just under 24,000 students in both school years were using enrollment option to attend a public school district that was not the resident district.
It's 24,000. That's what, 8% of the kids?
I think that's probably close. I should turn
Well,
to
because
Mr.
option enrollment, we don't have option enrollment for preschoolers, do we?
No, it's K-12 only, so
Okay, so, and there's like.
310,000 K-12, so 24,000 of that would get you your percentage.
And the 310 includes parochial, doesn't it? Private.
No, that's in the public school system only.
K through
Non-publics,
12. K through 12.
yeah, by the way,
Non-public's 38,000.
non-public has been between 35 and 37,000 year to year. Didn't look at that. We can get you that data.
No, that's fine. I
Yeah,
can find it. So it's not 10%, but close to 10% are opting,
Just under 8.
just
I'm-
under 8.
8%. Okay.
Good, the school finance guy who does math all the time has done that for us real quickly here.
You don't get that by looking at what we spend on option funding because it's offset, because it's net option.
That's how TIOSA tries to fund it, is net option funding. This is based on student enrollment information that we get every year from all school districts, by
Just
the way.
admitting I've been wrong for 2 years.
No.
Should enjoy that.
No, absolutely not, Senator. Absolutely
Because I
not.
thought it was more like 12,000, but now I see it's 24,000. Okay.
In the sense of today is enrollment day, when enrollment in all public school districts is taken. So we will know shortly after this how many students are enrolled in the public, the non-public, and we have applications for exempt schools. So that today is that magic day for all numbers.
October 1.
Yep.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Thank you, everybody, for attending. That ends our hearing on LR 182. And it ends our hearing for today.